The price for Sable Voss's daughter was 40 gold coins, 3 sacks of grain, and safe passage for the rest of the Voss family through Alpha King Ronan Blackthorn's territory. Her father didn't look at her while he named the terms. He didn't look at her while the exchange happened either. A merchant's ledger opened on a rickety table, coins counted out one by one. Ren Voss standing silent in a doorway with her hands folded, because crying would only make it worse. She was 19. She was the weakest Omega in a village that measured a person's worth by how well they could shift, how fast they could run, how much pack magic hummed under their skin. And Ren had none of it. Not a trace. Her own mother had called her a waste of a dowry more than once, usually when she thought Ren wasn't listening. Ronan Blackthorn didn't want a bride. He wanted a debt settled and a warm body to prove some old alliance still meant something. He barely glanced at the girl his men brought back to the Blackthorn stronghold, tossed a fur cloak at her because the mountain air would kill her otherwise, and told his steward to find her a room far from his own. He had no idea what he'd just bought. 3 nights later, alone in a cold stone room, Ren Voss put her hand flat against a wall of solid rock, out of grief, out of nothing, just needing something to hold on to, and the wall turned to light. There used to be 4 Luna lines. Everyone knew that much, the way everyone knows the moon has phases without thinking too hard about why. 3 of them ended the same century, in wars nobody living remembered clearly anymore. The 4th simply disappeared. No battle, no funeral pyre, just a slow fading from the old registries until someone, generations later, decided it had probably died out quietly and stopped writing it down at all. Ren Voss's family kept sheep in a valley 2 days, from anywhere that mattered. Her mother's mother had come from somewhere further east, a place nobody in the village could name anymore, and had married and without a dowry, without papers, without anything but a strange habit of putting flowers on her windowsill on the new moon instead of the full one, a tradition the family kept doing long after nobody remembered why. Ren couldn't shift. That was the only fact about her that mattered to anyone in her village, and it had mattered so completely for so long that nobody, not her parents, not the pack healer who examined her twice as a child and found nothing wrong and nothing right either, ever thought to ask what else might be true about a girl who couldn't do the one thing every Omega was supposed to be able to do. Ronan Blackthorn didn't know any of this when his men rode into that valley collecting an old debt. He knew his grandfather had once done the Voss family's pack a favor during a famine, and that the current head of that pack, desperate, in debt to 3 different territories at once, had offered his daughter as the fastest way to clear what he owed. Ronan took the trade because refusing it cost him nothing, and accepting it cost him 1 spare room. He didn't think about it again until the girl put her hand against a wall in his own stronghold, and the stone lit up like something ancient had just opened its eyes. Ren had practiced not crying since she was 6 years old, the year her mother first called her broken in front of a healer who didn't bother correcting the word. It came in useful the morning her father sold her. 40 gold, Garrick Voss said, not to her, to the merchant standing in for Blackthorn's steward. And the grain. And the passage agreement, in writing, before she leaves this house. She's not a horse, Papa, Ren said, quiet, because loud never worked in this house. Her father didn't answer. He rarely did, when the answer would have required looking at her. The merchant, a tired-looking man named Osric, who clearly did this kind of business more often than Ren wanted to think about, glanced at her with something almost like pity. She's healthy. Healthy enough, her mother said from the doorway, arms crossed. Can't shift. Never could. But she cooks, she sews, she won't cause trouble. King Blackthorn didn't ask for a wife who causes trouble, Osric said. He asked for the girl the debt was owed for. That's you, then. Ren looked at the small bag she'd packed the night before. 2 dresses, a comb, a pressed flower from a windowsill tradition nobody in her family could explain anymore, and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent years learning exactly how little she was worth in this house, that no one was going to stop this. "Can I say goodbye to my sisters?" she asked. "They're at the Hendersons until this is done," her mother said. Not unkindly, just practically the way you'd mention the weather. Easier that way. Easier for them, Wren understood. Not for her. She rode out of the valley 2 hours later in the back of a merchant's cart, wedged between grain sacks that were, she noted with a dull kind of bitterness, worth almost as much to her family as she was. Nobody waved. Her father had already gone back inside by the time the cart reached the ridge road. She didn't cry until the valley disappeared behind the hills, and even then, only for a few minutes, because crying accomplished nothing and she'd learned that lesson early and thoroughly. The road to Blackthorn territory took 4 days. Osric wasn't unkind. He shared his food, didn't rush her, answered her careful questions about the king with the flat honesty of a man who had no reason to lie to cargo. "He's not cruel," Osric said, on the 3rd night, both of them sitting by a small fire. "Not the way some kings are, but he's not warm either. Lost his mother young, lost his first mate to a border raid before the bond even fully settled. Doesn't let much in anymore." "Will he be angry?" Wren asked. "That I can't shift?" Osric considered this with more care than the question probably deserved. "I don't think he'll care much either way. You're not being brought in as a bride, girl. You're being brought in to settle a debt his grandfather owed. He'll probably barely look at you." That, Wren thought, sounded like exactly what she was used to. She was almost right. Ronan Blackthorn glanced at her for exactly as long as it took to confirm she had arrived breathing, and then went back to the map spread across his war table. "Fenwick," he said to his steward, without looking up again. "Room in the East Wing. Somewhere warm. Get her a proper cloak before she freezes to death, and I have to explain that to her father's creditors." "Yes, Your Majesty." That was the entire conversation. Wren stood in the doorway of what she would later learn was the war room, holding her small bag, waiting for something else to happen. An introduction, a question, anything, and nothing did. The king had already moved on to whatever crisis the map represented, and a wiry, gray-haired steward named Fenwick was already gesturing for her to follow him down a long stone corridor. "Don't take it personally," Fenwick said, once they were out of earshot. "He's like that with everyone lately. Wasn't always." "What happened?" Wren asked, then immediately regretted it. Too forward, too much like the kind of question that got you in trouble back home. But Fenwick just shrugged. "Not my story to tell. Ask him yourself if you ever get the chance. Though I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for that particular conversation." Her room, when they reached it, was larger than anything she'd slept in her entire life. Stone walls, a proper bed, a window that looked out over mountains instead of sheep pens. It should have felt like luxury. It mostly felt like a very well-furnished cage. "You'll take your meals here, mostly," Fenwick said. "Kitchen staff will bring them. If you need anything, there's a bell by the door. His Majesty doesn't often have guests staying long-term, so forgive us if the arrangements aren't perfectly suited. We'll adjust as needed." "Am I a guest?" Wren asked. Fenwick paused at that, something considering in his expression. "That's a fair question. I don't think anyone's decided the answer yet, honestly. You're not a prisoner. You're not exactly free to leave either, given the terms of the debt settlement. Somewhere in between for now." He left her alone with that uncertain answer, and a room full of furniture nicer than anything she'd ever owned. Wren sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after he left, listening to unfamiliar sounds, wind against stone, distant voices, a kind of silence that had weight to it in a way the noisy, crowded farmhouse never had. She realized slowly, alone in a way she had never actually been alone before. No sisters sharing her room. No mother's disapproving voice through a thin wall. No father pretending she didn't exist at the dinner table. It should have felt lonely. For the first time in a long while, it just felt quiet. That night, unable to sleep, restless in the too large bed, she got up and pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall, the same gesture she'd made 100 times as a child, back home. Whenever the noise in the house got to be too much and she needed something solid and unmoving to hold onto. The wall lit up beneath her hand like the moon had come to live inside the stone. She snatched her hand back so fast she stumbled into the bed frame. The light didn't follow her. It simply faded, slow and reluctant, back into ordinary gray stone, leaving Ren standing in the dark with her heart slamming against her ribs and absolutely no explanation for what she'd just seen. She tried it again. Carefully. Palm flat, breath held. The stone glowed again, pale silver, softer this time, like it had been startled the first time, and was more careful now, spreading out from beneath her hand in slow, deliberate patterns that looked less like light and more like something breathing. "That's not possible," she said out loud to no one, because there was no one else in the room to hear how badly her voice shook. She sat with her back against the wall for the rest of the night, palms still pressed to the stone, watching the light pulse faintly under her hand like it had a heartbeat of its own. She didn't sleep. She didn't call for Fenwick, or the bell by the door, or anyone at all. Some instinct, sharper and older than anything she'd ever consciously decided, told her that whatever this was, it needed to stay quiet until she understood it better herself. By morning, exhausted and no closer to any explanation, she'd made a decision. She would say nothing. Not to Fenwick, not to the kitchen staff, not to anyone in this stronghold full of strangers who already thought of her, at best, as an inconvenient debt settlement. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, carrying a tray back to the kitchens because she'd rather move than sit alone in that room with its glowing wall, she turned a corner too fast and collided directly with King Ronan Blackthorn. The tray went one way. She went the other, catching herself against the corridor wall, and the stone lit up beneath her palm, bright and unmistakable, right in front of him. Ronan went very still. "What," he said very slowly, "was that?" Ren stared at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. "I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It's happened before. In my room. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't understand it myself, and I didn't think." She stopped, old habits swallowing the rest of the sentence. "Didn't think anyone would believe me. Didn't think it mattered what happened to me either way." Ronan crouched, pressing his own hand flat against the same stretch of wall. Nothing happened. No light. No wodoms. Just cold, ordinary stone under an Alpha King's palm. "Do it again," he said. She hesitated, then placed her hand beside his. The stone lit instantly, silver light spreading out in slow, deliberate rings, considerably brighter than it had ever been alone in her room. Ronan's expression, guarded and controlled through their entire brief acquaintance, cracked open into something Ren hadn't seen from him yet. Not fury, not suspicion. Something closer to disbelief chasing its own tail. "Fenwick," he said, without raising his voice, and somehow the old steward appeared within seconds, as though he'd been waiting just out of sight the entire time. "Send for the eldest healer in the territory. Tonight. Tell her it's about a Luna mark, and tell her to come discreetly." "A Luna mark?" Ren repeated. "I don't know what that means." Ronan looked at her, really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It means," he said, "that whoever your grandmother actually was, girl, she wasn't just some farmer's wife from nowhere in particular. The healer's name was Old Marin, and she'd lived in Blackthorn territory longer than Ronan had been alive, in a cottage far enough from the stronghold that summoning her discreetly meant a 2-hour ride each way and considerable patience. She arrived close to midnight, wrapped in a traveling cloak that smelled of dried herbs, and studied Ren for a long, silent moment before saying anything at all. "Show me," she said finally. Ren pressed her palm to the wall of the small receiving room Ronan had cleared for exactly this purpose. The stone lit, silver and slow, the same quiet pulse it had shown every time now. Marin made a sound low in her throat, not quite surprise, more like something confirmed after a long time of doubting it would ever be. "Well," she said, "I did not expect to live long enough to see this again." "See what?" Ren asked. "A true Luna mark," Marin said. "Not a bond glow, not a pack confirmation shimmer. Those are common enough. Any properly matched wolf can manage those. This is older. Considerably older." She turned to Ronan. "Your Majesty, has this girl shifted? Ever in her life?" "No," Ronan said. "By her own account, never once." "That tracks," Marin said, nodding slowly, like a puzzle piece had just clicked somewhere in her memory. The old Luna bloodlines didn't shift the way ordinary wolves do. Their power ran differently, through the land itself, through stone and root and water, rather than through a wolf's own body. A Luna who couldn't shift wasn't broken. She was simply a different kind of wolf than the ones doing the measuring. Ren sat down slowly, the weight of 19 years of being called broken suddenly, quietly rearranging itself into something she didn't yet have words for. "There were 4 lines," Marin continued, settling into a chair with the unhurried patience of someone very old and very used to explaining things to people much younger than herself. "Ashgrove, Moonhollow, Thornwick, and Versong, the 4th, and the one that vanished most completely, sometime around 4 generations back. No war ended it, not that anyone recorded. It simply faded from the registries, one quiet generation at a time, until people stopped believing it had ever existed at all outside of old stories." "My grandmother," Ren said slowly. "She came from somewhere east. Nobody in my family ever really explained where." "Versong territory sat east, before it dissolved," Marin said. "It would fit. A young woman leaving a dying bloodline behind, marrying into an ordinary farming family, never telling anyone what she'd actually walked away from. That's not an unusual story. For a Luna line trying to survive quietly rather than draw attention, it could no longer defend." Ronan had been silent through most of this, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the low lamplight. "What does it mean?" he said finally, for her. Practically, Marin said. "It means the girl your grandfather's debt bought you, Your Majesty, is very likely the last living heir of the Versong Luna line, which means considerably more than a settled debt is currently sitting in your East Wing." Ren felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What does that mean it means?" Marin's expression softened, just slightly, the first genuine gentleness she'd shown all evening. "It means, child, that for the first time in your life, the fact that you couldn't shift wasn't a flaw. It was simply the wrong measurement being used on the wrong kind of wolf. I'd suggest you take some time to sit with that before worrying about anything else the world might decide to make of it." Ronan found her in the Stronghold's small garden 2 days later, sitting on a stone bench with her hand resting, almost absently, against the low wall beside her. Not glowing, just resting there, like she was still getting used to the idea that it could. "You've been avoiding me," he said, not quite an accusation. "I didn't think you wanted company," Ren said. "You've spoken maybe 6 sentences to me since I arrived. I assumed that was the arrangement." Something flickered across his face, not quite guilt, but close enough to it that Ren felt a small, surprised satisfaction at having landed the observation. "I bought a debt settlement," he said. "I didn't expect," he stopped, seeming to reconsider the sentence entirely. "I didn't expect any of this." "Neither did I," Ren said. "For what it's worth." He sat down on the far end of the bench, close enough for conversation, far enough to be careful about it. Marin wants to send word to what remains of the old Versong records in the capital archives. Confirm the bloodline properly, rather than relying on one healer's memory of stories that old. And if she's right, then you're not a debt settlement anymore, Ronan said. You're the last living heir of a Luna line 4 kingdoms have spent generations assuming was extinct. Which changes things I haven't fully worked out yet. Changes them how? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more care than Ren expected. There are people who would want that bloodline controlled, married into their own territory, their own line, before anyone else could claim the alliance first. There are also people who'd consider it a threat worth eliminating outright, rather than risk a Luna power reasserting itself somewhere they don't control. He glanced at her. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because you deserve to understand exactly what just changed, rather than being kept in the dark the way you were about everything else your entire life. Ren absorbed that with more steadiness than she expected of herself. 19 years of being told she didn't matter enough to explain things to had, apparently, built a strange kind of resilience for exactly this moment. What do you want to do about it? She asked. I haven't decided, Ronan admitted, and something about the honesty of that answer. No performance, no calculation dressed up as certainty, settled something anxious in her chest. I know what my council will want. Formalize a bond, secure the alliance, protect the bloodline through marriage before any rival territory gets the same idea. That's the obvious move. And what do you want? Ren asked again, more pointed this time. Ronan looked at her. Actually looked the way he had that first night in the corridor, like he was reconsidering something he'd assumed he already understood. I want to ask you, he said slowly, rather than simply decide for you the way everyone else in your life apparently has, up to this point. You've been sold once already, Ren. I have no interest in being the second man to make that decision on your behalf, without asking what you actually want. Ren hadn't expected that. She sat with it for a long moment, the garden quiet around them, her hand still resting on the low stone wall. I don't know what I want yet, she said honestly. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I need time to figure out how to actually answer it. Take it, Ronan said simply. Whatever this becomes, bond, alliance, nothing at all. I'd rather it be something you chose than something else that just happened to you. The confirmation from the Capitol Archives took 3 weeks to arrive, and by the time it did, the news had already begun leaking beyond Blackthorn's borders, not through any deliberate betrayal, but through the ordinary, unstoppable drift of gossip among traveling merchants and border guards who'd noticed a stronghold suddenly, urgently guarding a girl nobody had cared about a month earlier. The first sign of trouble came from the north, a formal letter from Territory Ashgrove, whose ruling family claimed direct descent from one of the 3 surviving Luna lines, requesting, in language polite enough to mask its actual demand, that the Versong heir be brought north for proper verification and protection among her rightful kin. They don't want to protect you, Ronan said, reading the letter aloud in the war room, Marin and Fenwick both present. They want to absorb you into their own line, a 4th Luna bloodline, married into Ashgrove's existing 3, that would make them the single most powerful territory on this continent by a considerable margin. And if I refuse? Ren asked. Then we'll see how politely worded their next letter is, Ronan said grimly. It didn't take long to find out. 2 weeks later, a small Ashgrove delegation arrived at Blackthorn's border. Not an army, not yet, but enough armed escort to make the intent behind their diplomatic visit unmistakable. Ren watched them from the stronghold's high window, a knot of dread tightening in her chest that felt uncomfortably familiar, the particular helplessness of being wanted only for what she represented, rather than for anything genuinely her own. You don't have to see them, Ronan told her, finding her still at the window an hour later. I can handle this negotiation without your direct involvement, if that's what you'd prefer. No, Ren said, surprising herself with the steadiness of the refusal. I spent my whole life letting other people decide things about my future, while I stood in doorways, saying nothing. I'm not doing that again. Not for this. The formal meeting took place in Blackthorn's receiving hall. Lord Casimir Ashgrove, a composed, silver-haired man whose courtesy carried an unmistakable edge of calculation, presenting his territory's case with practiced, diplomatic precision. We simply wish to ensure the Versong heir receives proper training and protection among those who understand her heritage, he said. Blackthorn territory, however well-intentioned, has no living memory of Luna traditions. We do. I've had 3 weeks of proper memory, Ren said, before Ronan could respond, compared to 19 years of no one caring whether I existed at all. Forgive me if I'm not eager to trade one set of people who want to use me for another. Casimir's composed expression flickered, clearly unprepared for the girl in question to speak for herself with any conviction. I would remind you, he said, more carefully now, that a Luna heir carries considerable responsibility to the old bloodline's continued survival. That responsibility isn't simply a matter of personal preference. It's exactly a matter of personal preference, Ren said. It's my bloodline, my life. If it comes with responsibility, that responsibility is mine to define, not something Ashgrove gets to hand me terms for, the same way my father handed me over for 40 gold and some grain. The silence that followed carried a weight Ren hadn't fully anticipated, Ronan watching her with something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine surprise at exactly how much steel had apparently been sitting quietly beneath 19 years of careful, learned silence. Casimir Ashgrove departed within the hour, diplomatic courtesy thin over unmistakable displeasure, and everyone in that hall understood clearly that his territory wouldn't simply accept her refusal without further, considerably less polite attempts to secure what they wanted. The attack came 11 nights later, not through Blackthorn's front gates but through a smaller, poorly guarded eastern postern that Ashgrove's scouts had apparently identified during their brief diplomatic visit, disguised raiders moving with a coordination that left no doubt about their actual origin, whatever banners they'd left behind to maintain deniability. Ren woke to shouting and the distant clash of steel, her first instinct, old, deep, trained by years of learning to make herself small and quiet when trouble came, to hide. She didn't. Instead, she found herself moving toward the noise rather than away from it, some new, unfamiliar conviction pushing her feet forward even as fear tightened every muscle in her body. She found Ronan in the stronghold's central courtyard, fighting alongside a handful of his guard against considerably more attackers than the eastern breach should have allowed through, his expression grim with the particular focus of a man calculating odds he didn't like. "Get back inside," he shouted, the moment he spotted her. Ren didn't. She pressed both hands flat against the courtyard's stone wall instead, desperate, instinctive, with no real plan beyond needing to do something. The light that answered wasn't the slow, gentle glow she'd grown used to in quiet rooms at midnight. It tore through the stone like something finally, furiously awake, spreading out from her palms in a blinding silver wave that knocked 3 of the nearest attackers clean off their feet and sent the rest stumbling backward, shielding their eyes against light that seemed to come from the ground itself. Ren stared at her own glowing hands, shocked and half terrified by what she'd just done. "Do it again," Ronan called, already pressing his advantage against the attacker's sudden disarray. She did, steadier this time, more deliberate, understanding with each attempt a little more about how to shape the light rather than simply unleash it. By the time the last of Ashgrove's disguised raiders fled back through the breached postern, the entire courtyard's stone walls pulsed faintly silver, like the whole stronghold had woken up alongside her. Afterward, in the chaotic, exhausted aftermath of counting injuries and securing the breach, Ronan found her sitting against the same wall, hands still faintly glowing, staring at nothing. "You saved considerably more lives than mine tonight," he said, sitting down beside her without asking permission this time. "I didn't know I could do that," Ren said. "I still don't really understand what I did." "Neither do I," Ronan admitted. "But I know what I saw. And I know, watching you tonight, that whatever choice you eventually make about Ashgrove, about staying here, about any of it, it's not going to be because you're weak or because anyone gets to decide it for you. Not anymore." Ren looked at him, exhaustion and something warmer, harder to name, tangled together in her chest. "You almost sound proud." "I am," Ronan said simply. "For what that's worth, from a man who bought you as a debt settlement and didn't bother learning your name for the first 2 days you were here." "It's worth something," Ren said, surprising herself again with how true that felt. "More than I expected it to, honestly." Ashgrove's failed raid, rather than achieving its intended purpose, ended up accomplishing the opposite. Word spread quickly, through the same merchant and border guard gossip that had first exposed Ren's identity, that Blackthorn territory now stood protected by a genuine, awakened Luna power, one who had personally repelled an entire raiding party rather than needing rescue from it. Casimir Ashgrove sent no further delegations. Whatever calculation his territory had originally made about an easy claim on an untrained, unprotected heir clearly no longer applied. The weeks that followed brought Ren through a slow, deliberate process of learning what her own strength actually meant, Marin teaching her, patiently and without the rushed urgency of political crisis, how to shape the stonelight into something considerably more useful than instinctive bursts of defensive panic. "You're not required to decide your whole future today," Marin told her, during one such lesson, watching Ren carefully coax a soft glow along a garden wall rather than simply flooding it all at once. "Power like this rewards patience. So does everything else worth having, generally." Ronan gave her exactly the space he'd promised throughout all of it, present when she wanted him present, absent when she needed quiet, never once pushing toward the formal bond as counsel continued, with increasing impatience, to suggest. "They want an answer," he told her honestly one evening, both of them sitting in the same garden where he'd first asked what she actually wanted rather than deciding for her. "My counsel. Ashgrove hasn't given up entirely, just gone quiet. Several other territories have started sending careful, feeling out letters of their own now that word spread. Everyone wants to know what you intend to do." "What do you want me to say?" Ren asked. "I want you to say whatever's actually true," Ronan said. "Even if that's nothing to do with me at all." Ren considered this for a long moment, turning over 19 years of never once being asked what she wanted, against 2 months of a stronghold slowly, quietly becoming the first place she'd ever lived where her own choices seemed to genuinely matter to someone. "I don't want to be handed to Ashgrove like a prize piece for their collection," she said slowly. "I don't want to be sold again, to anyone for any reason, no matter how it's dressed up in polite letters." "Understood," Ronan said. "That's easy enough to refuse, regardless of anything else." "But I also don't want to stay here," Ren continued, "because it's simply the safest, easiest option available. If I stay, I want it to be because I actually choose you, not because you were the first person who didn't sell me." Something in Ronan's expression shifted, careful and genuine at once. "That's fair," he said. "More than fair. Take whatever time you need to figure out the difference." "I think," Ren said, surprising herself with the honesty of it, "I might already know the difference. I just wanted to say it out loud first before I let myself believe it." And she reached over, resting her hand against his, not the wall, not the stone, just his hand, ordinary and warm, and felt no light this time. Just his fingers, closing carefully around hers. "I choose to stay," she said, "because of you, not because of anything safer than that." The formal bonding ceremony, when it finally happened 4 months later, bore almost no resemblance to the transaction that had first brought Ren to Blackthorn territory, No ledger, no counted coins, no father speaking terms to a room while his daughter stood silent in a doorway. She wore a simple gray dress, considerably plainer than court tradition typically demanded, because she'd asked for exactly that, and Ronan hadn't argued. "You could have something considerably grander," Fenwick had pointed out, mildly, during preparations. "You're the last Fairsong Luna. People expect a certain amount of spectacle." "I spent my whole life being an item other people decided the terms for," Wren told him. "I'd like my wedding to at least belong to me." The ceremony itself was small, held in the same courtyard where the walls had once lit up silver in her defense, Marin presiding with the same unhurried patience she brought to everything, a handful of Blackthorn's guard and staff gathered as witnesses. No grand political spectacle beyond what genuinely mattered to the two people actually making the promise. "I don't offer you a throne," Ronan said during his vows, "because I don't think that's what you actually want, or what would ever properly honor what you survived to become. I offer you a home where your choices are genuinely your own, for as long as we're both alive to keep that promise." "I spent 19 years being told what I was worth by people who never once asked," Wren said in turn. "I choose you because you asked. Because you kept asking, even when it would have been easier to simply decide for me. I don't think I could have chosen anyone who didn't understand why that mattered." Word of the Faersong Luna's return spread slowly over the following years, not through conquest or grand political maneuvering, but through the quieter, more durable work Wren gradually built for herself, training other overlooked wolves whose gifts didn't fit the ordinary shape everyone expected, establishing a small school within Blackthorn territory for exactly the kind of misunderstood children she'd once been herself. Her own father sent one letter, 18 months after the sale, requesting reconciliation now that her name carried weight worth associating with. She never answered it. Some debts, she decided, simply didn't need settling. On a quiet evening some years later, sitting in the same garden with her hand resting easily against the low stone wall, no urgency behind it now, just habit, just comfort, Wren watched the light rise soft and silver beneath her palm and felt, for the first time in her entire life, genuinely, uncomplicatedly at home in her own skin. "Any regrets?" Ronan asked, settling beside her the way he had 100 evenings before this one. "Only that it took someone selling me to finally find out what I was actually worth," Wren said. "But I've stopped letting that regret outweigh everything since. I got here. That's what matters now." The end.